Okay, so get ready for a wild ride today because we are diving deep, deep, deep into the world of Arthur
He
Schopenhauer.
was a fascinating figure.
Yeah, and we love a good philosophical challenge. And his ideas on how we humans form knowledge and make decisions, let me tell you, they definitely fit the bill.
Yeah.
You sent over some excerpts from the Cambridge edition of Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation, Volume 2.
Right.
And let me tell you, there is a lot to unpack.
Yeah, there is. Schopenhauer was, well, he was a bit of a rebel in the philosophy world.
Oh, yeah. You don't call out Fichte and Hegel, especially, like, back then, without ruffling some feathers.
No, he really didn't pull any punches.
Yeah.
But I think what's really interesting, especially for our deep dive today, is that Schopenhauer, he really wanted to make philosophy accessible, engaging. He wanted it to be relevant for everyone, not just, academics.
And I think that's one of the things I really appreciate about his writing. You're right. It's very direct, especially for philosophy. Like, he's not afraid to just come right out and say what he thinks.
He's very clear about that.
Yeah, he's clear about it, but at the same time, he doesn't shy away from those really thorny, complex ideas.
Yeah.
Like, take, for instance, his distinction between will and intellect.
Right.
He really presents these as almost like two distinct forces battling it out within us.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most fascinating parts of his work. He describes the will as this primal, just this raw, insatiable force, It's driving all living things.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you're a human or a flower, you have this will that's constantly striving.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it often operates beneath our conscious awareness. It's not something we're always aware of. And then you have the intellect.
Right.
Which you can kind of think of as the wills, like more refined, more sophisticated partner.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And that's the part of us that observes, it reasons, it makes plans. It's essentially trying to kind of like wrangle the will, make sense of the world so the will can, get what it wants.
Okay. So it's kind of like that age-old struggle of like, man, I really should eat the salad. But then you've got the burger just calling your name.
Yeah, that's a great example, actually. That's your will just kind of throwing a tantrum right there.
Yeah. I want the burger.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And Schopenhauer argues that this whole struggle between the will and the intellect, it plays out in like the most surprising ways, even down to how we perceive the world through our senses.
Interesting. Okay, so walk me through this. How do our senses tie into this whole will versus intellect battle?
So he points out that our senses themselves, like when we were talking about sight, hearing, they're not inherently designed to experience pleasure or pain.
Oh, okay.
Like, think about it for a second. When you, God forbid, injure your eye or your ear, the retina in your eye or the auditory nerve in your ear, those things, they don't actually feel pain.
Right, that makes sense. It's the stuff around it that really...
Exactly. It's the tissue around them that hurts.
Yeah.
So Schopenhauer, he uses that as an example to illustrate that our senses, they're more about just delivering raw data to the brain. They're like neutral information pipeline, just feeding the will.
Oh, wow. Okay, so he's saying our senses aren't necessarily about, like, subjective experience or feeling. It's more about just getting the information to the will as efficiently as possible.
Exactly. He saw our senses as these amazingly complex, but also incredibly efficient instruments. And they're just designed to, get that information to the will as quickly and objectively as possible. And this ties back to one of his most famous analogies. He compares the relationship between the will and the intellect to, get this, a strong blind man carrying a seeing but lame man on his shoulders.
Oh, yeah, I remember that line. That's
Yeah.
such a vivid image. You've got this blind guy, he's got all this brute strength, but he's totally lost without the other guy's sight to guide him.
Right. And I think that image so perfectly captures the interdependence of will and intellect. Because the will, it's powerful, but without the intellect, it's directionless.
It's like a bull in a china shop, right?
Exactly. And then, on the other hand, the intellect can, it can see, it can understand.
Right.
But without the will's force, it can't actually do anything with that knowledge.
It's stuck.
It's stuck.
Right.
So they need each other, but this whole question of who's really in control, it makes you think twice about how much free will we actually have.
It's a bit unsettling when you really stop and think about it. Like, if this blind, unconscious will is, like, calling the shots, are we really in control, or are we just puppets dancing to its tune? Like, where does free will fit into all of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Schopenhauer doesn't claim to have all the answers.
Right.
But he suggests that the first step to any kind of real freedom is self-knowledge. really deeply understanding our own motivations and desires, which, of course, are often driven by the will.
So before we can even think about steering the ship, we've got to understand the currents that are already pushing us along.
Exactly. And that's where Schopenhauer, he takes us even further down this rabbit hole because he argues that our very consciousness, how we experience ourselves in the world, is actually fragmented.
Fragmented. Okay, now you're really blowing my mind here. So if our consciousness is fragmented, how can we even hope to make sense of anything, let alone our deepest desires?
It's a great question, and Schopenhauer, true to form, he uses these really striking analogies. He compares our thinking to a magic lantern that can focus on only one picture at a time.
Hmm.
Each thought, each perception, it flashes before our minds for a brief moment,
Okay.
and then it vanishes. It disappears to make way for the next one. It's like this constant, ever-shifting stream.
Like a slideshow in our mind.
Yeah, and he's suggesting that this flickering of consciousness, this fragmented way of experiencing the world, it actually influences how we make decisions.
Oh, interesting. So how does that work? How does this fragmented consciousness actually play out in our decision-making process?
It really is like a slideshow in our minds, constantly shifting from one image to the next. According to Schopenhauer, this has some pretty significant implications for how we make decisions.
So I'm hooked now. Tell me more. How does this fragmented consciousness actually play out in our decision-making? Does he give us any advice on, how to handle this constant mental shuffle?
Well, Schopenhauer, he doesn't really offer like a step-by-step guide. He's more about exploring the underlying mechanics of our minds. He's really interested in the nature of logic and reason, but also how those seemingly objective processes, how they're still influenced by this interplay of will and intellect.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that even when we think we're being totally rational, totally logical, that our will might still be pulling the strings behind the scenes?
That's precisely what he's arguing.
Yeah.
He suggests that our reasoning often serves to justify the desires of the will,
Oh, wow. Okay.
even when those desires might be, not the most rational.
Okay, I can see how that might happen, but do you have an example? How can we be so blind to our own thought processes?
Think about a time when you were trying to remember something, but you just couldn't quite grasp it. It was like right there on the tip of your tongue. You're searching your mind, searching, and then suddenly it clicks. The memory surfaces.
Yes, I hate it when that happens. But I also kind of love that feeling of relief when I finally remember.
Exactly. But what Schopenhauer would say is that this memory, it was always there in the recesses of your mind. It wasn't like it just materialized out of thin air. It just took the right trigger, the right association to bring it to the forefront of your consciousness.
Okay.
And that trigger often comes from your will, from that desire to find that specific memory.
Oh, interesting. So it's like our will acts as this filter, guiding our thoughts and perceptions towards what it wants to see. And this happens even in the realm of logic and reason, not just with, our emotions or desires.
Absolutely. Our intellect, that capacity for logic, for reason, it can be surprisingly susceptible to the will's influence. We might think we're being completely rational, making a purely objective decision, when in reality our will is kind of whispering in the background, subtly shaping our thoughts to align with what it wants.
So it sounds like Schopenhauer has a pretty, I don't know, maybe even a bit of a pessimistic view of our ability to be truly objective, truly in control of our own minds. I mean, is there any hope? Does he offer any solutions to escape this tyranny of the will?
He does offer a path, but he's very upfront about the fact that it's not easy. He suggests that the key lies in quieting the will, recognizing its influence, and learning to detach from its constant demands.
Easier said than done, right? I mean, our will, it's so ingrained in how we experience the world. It's almost like asking someone to, detach from their own shadow.
You're exactly right. It's a profound shift in perspective. And Schopenhauer doesn't sugarcoat it. He says quieting the will is a huge task. It requires us to fundamentally reevaluate what brings true happiness, what brings true freedom.
Okay, so where do we even begin? Does he give us any practical advice? How do we actually quiet this powerful force within us?
Well, Schopenhauer was a big advocate for asceticism, for actively denying the will's cravings for immediate gratification. He saw this as a way to kind of weaken the will's grip on our consciousness, allowing us to see the world more clearly, more objectively.
So things like fasting, solitude, or any practice that requires us to, resist our immediate desires.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But he's not necessarily advocating for a life of total deprivation. For Schopenhauer, asceticism, it wasn't just about these physical practices. It was more about cultivating a certain mindset, a mindset that recognizes that our desires, they're often fleeting.
That's
It's about shifting our focus from external gratification to inner peace, to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world.
So it's more about recognizing that, yeah, we have these desires, these cravings, but they don't have to control us. There's a way to find fulfillment outside of that constant chase. But how do we actually do that? What does Schopenhauer suggest?
Well, alongside asceticism, he believed that art, particularly music, offered a really powerful path to quieting the will, to experiencing a different way of being.
Oh, interesting.
He argued that art, especially music, could provide us with a glimpse into the timeless essence of things, almost like a refuge from that ceaseless striving of the will.
That makes sense. Like when you're totally engrossed in a beautiful piece of music, it's like the rest of the world kind of fades away. You're completely absorbed in the experience.
Exactly. And Schopenhauer believed that these moments of pure aesthetic contemplation, those moments when we're captivated by beauty, they give us a taste of what it means to be liberated from that tyranny of the will.
So through art, we can catch a glimpse of what it means to be free from that constant striving, to experience the world without the filter of our own desires.
Precisely. Schopenhauer, he argued that art allows us to experience the world in this different mode, one that's free from the constant demands of the will.
This is all incredibly fascinating, but I have to be honest, it's a lot to take in. It really makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself and how your mind works.
Schopenhauer's philosophy will definitely do that.
Yeah.
He forces us to confront these complexities of our own minds, the hidden forces that shape our thoughts and our actions.
Yeah, he's really pulling back the curtain, letting us see the machinery of our minds in action. But he doesn't just like drop these mind-blowing concepts on us and then leave us to figure them out on our own. He actually connects these ideas to really specific aspects of human experience, like love and relationships.
That's right.
And given, your own life experiences, I think you'll find his perspective on love particularly interesting.
I'm intrigued. Schopenhauer's views on love were definitely a bit, should we say, unconventional?
Oh, unconventional. How so?
Well, he was a bit of a romantic cynic. He saw romantic love, that head over heels, butterflies in your stomach feeling. He saw that as being primarily driven by the will of the species, not necessarily by individual choice or free will.
So you mean falling head over heels in love is really just nature's way of tricking us into having children? Ouch, that's kind of a buzzkill, isn't it?
That was Schopenhauer for you, always ready to challenge those cherished romantic notions. But within that seemingly cynical perspective, he actually raises some thought-provoking points. He argues that the intensity of passionate love is often fleeting, primarily because its biological purpose, according to him, is just to bring two individuals together to procreate.
So once that biological imperative is fulfilled, the intense passion, it kind of fades away.
That was his observation. And of course, it's a generalization. There are always exceptions. But he argues that this is why we often see those whirlwind romances. They burn bright and fast and then they fizzle out.
Yeah, I can see where he's coming from. I've definitely seen those relationships that are super intense at first, but then they fizzle out as quickly as they ignited.
Exactly. And Schopenhauer would argue that this is, at least in part, due to the powerful but often fleeting nature of passionate love, which he saw as, mainly driven by that primal instinct to perpetuate the species.
So even though he has, a bit of a less romantic view of love than maybe we're used to, he doesn't completely dismiss it, does he?
No, not at all. Even with his, I guess, somewhat pessimistic view of human nature, he does acknowledge that there's a possibility for genuine affection, for real connection between individuals. He just believed that we should be aware of those powerful, often unconscious forces that might be influencing our experiences, even in something as seemingly pure and innocent as love.
So even within this biological imperative, there's still room for genuine human connection.
Absolutely. And I think this speaks to a broader theme in Schopenhauer's work, this tension between our more animalistic drives, those primal urges, and our capacity for higher consciousness, for understanding, for something that transcends those basic instincts.
So we're driven by these primal forces, but we're also capable of experiencing the world on this whole other level, this deeper, more meaningful level. It's like we're constantly caught between these two sides of ourselves.
You've got it. And this tension, this ongoing dance between will and intellect, it plays out in some pretty fascinating ways when it comes to how we form knowledge. Schopenhauer, he was deeply skeptical of relying solely on logic and reason to understand the world. He thought there was more to it than that.
So he believed there's more to knowledge than just cold, hard facts, rational analysis, all that stuff.
He argued that there's this whole other type of knowledge, a more, I guess you could say, a more direct, intuitive understanding of the essence of things. He called it intuitive knowledge.
So like a kind of knowing that goes beyond just words and concepts, more like a gut feeling.
Yes. And Schopenhauer believed that art, especially music, could give us this pathway to intuitive knowledge.
Hmm.
He saw music as this unique language, one that speaks directly to the will, bypassing the intellect's need to, categorize and analyze everything.
So through music, we can access a deeper level of understanding, one that really resonates with us on this like core level in a way that words often can't.
Precisely. He believed that music allows us to, in a way, grasp the underlying reality of the world, the ebb and flow of these forces that are driving not just our individual lives, but like all of existence. And he argued that this is a form of knowledge that logic and reason alone could never fully grasp.
It's like music allows us to tap into this like universal language, a way of knowing that goes beyond the limits of our individual minds. It's a powerful concept. But I'm curious, how does this idea of intuitive knowledge, of understanding the world through something like music, how does that relate back to making better decisions in our lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if we go back to Schopenhauer's idea that our intellect is often, kind of a tool of the will, then relying only on rational decision-making, it can be kind of misleading.
Oh, how so?
Well, we might think we're being totally logical, making these rational choices, but those choices could actually be heavily influenced by our unconscious desires and motivations, those things that are bubbling beneath the surface.
Okay, so how do we find that balance then? How can I tap into this intuitive knowledge to make more, I guess you could say, authentic decisions, decisions that are more in line with who we really are?
Schopenhauer, he didn't really offer, a simple formula, but he did emphasize the importance of self-awareness.
Self-awareness, okay.
He believed that by really tuning in to how our will operates, those subtle desires, the fears, the motivations, all of it, by becoming aware of all that, we can start to loosen its grip on our decision-making process.
So it's about cultivating a deeper understanding of ourselves, becoming aware of those like hidden currents that are always influencing our thoughts and actions.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those moments when our intellect is just kind of, making excuses for the will.
Right.
And learning to tell the difference between those moments and the moments when our intellect is actually guiding us toward choices that are aligned with our deeper values or aspirations.
So it's like we need to become more discerning observers of our own minds, noticing those subtle ways that our desires might be clouding our judgment. It's like this ongoing process of self-discovery, right?
Yes. And it's important to note it's not about trying to, suppress the will entirely. I mean, that's pretty much an impossible task. It's more about understanding the will's power and learning how to channel it in more constructive directions.
So it's not about becoming some kind of emotionless robot. It's more about cultivating a mindful awareness of our inner world, our desires, motivations, all of it.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's one of Schopenhauer's most valuable insights. This idea that the key to living a more fulfilling life, it really lies in understanding that complex interplay between our will and our intellect.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive into Schopenhauer's philosophy. Challenging, insightful, a bit unsettling at times, but definitely a lot to think about. He really makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself and how your mind works.
He definitely doesn't shy away from those big existential questions.
Yeah.
But that's what makes his work so thought-provoking, so enduringly relevant, even today. He challenges us to grapple with the complexities of human experience, this whole interplay between our desires, our intellect, our capacity for self-awareness.
And he doesn't offer any easy answers.
He really doesn't.
But he gives us this framework for understanding ourselves, understanding the world around us, with a lot more clarity and a lot more depth.
And maybe that's the mark of a truly great philosopher, right?
Maybe so. They leave us with more questions than answers, but they set us on this path of self-discovery, and that journey, it extends far beyond the pages of their work.
I love that, yeah.
So for those of you listening, if you're ready for more of this mental workout, you know what to do.
That's right.
Send us your next philosophical brain twister, and we'll be back to unpack it together.